She, her, I prefer verbal POIs. I'm going as PM this round.
From Prop, Wayne, he's a audible POIs. I'll also be doing the reply speech. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Korsing. I'll be going with preferred gender pronoun she, her. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gia. I will be LO, and my preferred pronoun is she, her. I prefer my POI verbally. Thank you. Good luck for the round.
Hello, I'm Buzzlin. I will be the second speaker. Preferred POI verbally, please, she, her. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I'll be opposition with she, her pronouns, POIs verbal. Thanks.
All right, so before we begin, some general housekeeping rules. POIs between 1 and 6, please be mindful of your POIs, do not badger, as well as be mindful of what you are saying within the round. Be sensitive towards issues and as well as certain phrases or words that could be sensitive. Before we begin, Hishik, can you begin recording?
I'm already recording it.
All right, great. Thank you. So without further ado, to start the debate, let's hear it from Prime Minister. Here.
All right. Just give me a second.
Sorry, also a reminder for debaters, please keep your own time and be mindful of your time. Thank you.
Okay. Just a reminder, verbal POIs. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Nepotism itself hinders the capacity for post-conflict states to develop for the higher likelihood that corruption and other detrimental problems to occur. It is particularly harmful for developing nations who are already struggling with post-conflict reconstruction and establishing a stable political climate. Very proud to propose. Before I move on to my arguments, a few pieces of important characterization. So what is the context of post-colonial or post-conflict states, right? We think that these are developing nations that have experienced decolonization. The development of these nations are particularly slow because the colonizers have plundered all of their resources during the process of colonization, right? And these nations are more prone to political instability and a lack of accountability in politics. For example, corruption, untransparent elections, gerrymandering, nepotism, etc. And who are the members of the previous regimes and what do they look like? We think that these are those political groups that are likely to be persistently dominant political parties. These are the parties or groups of people who have been in power for a very long time in the status quo. For example, around 15 to 20 years, basically a very long period of time. And most of them are political dynasties that are well established. Examples of these are the PAP in Singapore, ANC in South Africa, the Marcos regime in Philippines, and the Shinawatra regime in Thailand, etc. And what is our stance, right? The members of the previous regime and their families will not be holding political positions. For example, the PM, ministers of different sectors, etc. And how is the world of government going to look like? We are going to either elect or appoint other people to take up these political positions. So for example, other politicians, technocrats, etc. Basically, people who are not from the previous regimes. And they can have elections to elect people or representatives of the people. So we can also have an independent third party, for example, a Supreme Court or the Electoral Commission to oversee the process. A preemption here, if you say that the Electoral Commission is corrupted, then so is your democracy under opposition, right? But worst case, if the country is not democratic, the previous leader will just directly appoint another leader who is not from their family or regime, and these people are likely to be the people who are capable, who have support from citizens, and people whom they have less connections with because they are not from their family. So the burden of proof on our side is to prove that we are better able to build a comparatively better and more accountable political climate on site government. So my arguments today, number one, how this enforces a system that lacks accountability and why this in particular is bad towards the development of post-conflict states. So first of all, why do we think that corruption is more prevalent under the side of opposition? Because we think that having positions being taken up by your own family members, especially those important positions, for example, like the prime minister, the leader of the country, or other ministers of different sectors, for example, finance minister, transport minister, etc. And these positions basically look like money or social statuses, privileges, special passes, etc. that can be used to benefit themselves but also can be used to benefit other people. Right? So what can these positions that are taken up by literally the same family do? We think that it is significantly easier for corruption to exist. On 3 layers, number one, why is corruption likely, right? Because we think that there's just an incentive for them to maximize the use of these positions at all costs. They will be using their position, their power and in hand to do things like to extrapolate the most benefits out of it to get more money or get more fame whatsoever. And the second layer, why is corruption easier under this circumstance? Because of 3 reasons. Number one, because they have the incentive to cover up. Because of nepotism in general, which is bad, people from the same family have no interest to harm their own people, right? Because some are even their direct relatives or blood related people, for example, son and dad, they have literally no incentive to harm or expose them. And in order to do this in circumstances where corruption does occur, they are just going to choose to cover up all of these things, right? And the second reason, the capacity to cover up is just massive. The majority of them come from the same family or the political party, therefore it's like they are very likely not to report. But even if someone reports to them, it's very unlikely that any actions will be taken against them because they are able to control the media coverage, etc., given their power and in this case, because the entire country is dominated by one singular political group. And for the third reason, after one person is corrupted, it signals that the corruption is visible and that practically there's very little accountability that can hold them into check. Because when the entire political group is full of people of their own family or regime, there's little to no check and balances that exist under your side. So on this next layer, what is the harm and why is it bad, right? We think that corruption hinders the capacity for the nation to progress as a whole, because specifically under post-conflict states where people are poor and development is crucial, we think that it just harms them even more because they have already limited capacity to do so. And money getting corrupted, which means there are lesser funds for important infrastructure development to use to help the other people or help the minorities that are already suffering in status quo. You basically hinder the development under their side, while you are only benefiting those rich and privileged people in the positions of power. But particularly, we also think that once you establish this important national identity, once those people from the previous regime, they hold all those important political positions, we think that you are likely to going to establish a national identity. Therefore, it just means that it's just harder to get them out. Sorry, hold on. Because we think that these parties are dominant and these parties are likely to be there since the country has achieved independence. So this is why it's very hard for those people to vote them out even if they're corrupted. I'm sorry, it's 6. So now moving on to the next part of this argument, what is the comparative? All of the elected people come from different circles and different races or any groups and backgrounds, right? So it's just significantly harder for you to cover up any sort of corruption or bad things that the political group does because you don't have any bonds to rely upon. And we think that those people within the party itself are going to hold each other accountable as well. And in fact, you need to fight on yourself in order to sustain through this position that you are given. Because if there are any other more capable people within your political group itself, they're going to call you out for whatever bad things that you are doing, for example, corruption, right? We also think that it encourages grassroots campaigning because it shifts the competition from who has more power connections history to who actually solved the problem, right? For example, AOC Andrew Yang and UBI scheme. And there's basically more incentives for politicians to interact more with the voters, for example, engaging in community service and visiting slums to give them better living conditions, because right now they cannot rely on the connections that they have in order to stay in power. In conclusion, we are able to achieve a much more transparent and accountable political climate under our side. Very proud to propose. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech. Can you now have LO to start ops case? Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let me start off with a few points of rebuttal. Okay. First, they say it's their fault in the first place. Therefore, then I will have to rebut. Therefore, they actually have the incentive to actually do better and try to do something about the post-conflict states that are actually in. And even if there are selfish individuals who are doing things for their own personal gain, note that if a leader wants to actually gain something for their own selfish reason, it is crucial for them to actually have a country in a good state in order for them to gain anything like power, money, or social status in the first place. Therefore, we take this debate. Second of all, on how they say that we have very little accountability, I think this is incredibly incorrect because the people on the ground will actually hold them accountable, especially if their own land here are going to be at the stake. Since the people won't just stay quiet about this, they will definitely fight back. And this will then lead to the leader to actually self-actualize and do whatever it is that the people on the ground want, since it is their responsibility in the first place as a leader. Therefore, this will create an incentive for them to actually build a better country in the future, and this will be included in Bazin's speech later on. Now, burden of proof. Our burden is to prove two things. First is how letting members of previous regime and their family to be eligible to hold political position will be beneficial, and second, that we can provide that to a post-conflict state that call for urgent and desperate measure. Their burden as proposition is to prove counter-proposal to uplift the post-conflict society. Second, reasons as to why letting members of the previous regime and their family to hold political position is unjust. Now this is the characterization on the opposition side instead. We are going to characterize three things: post-conflict states, previous regimes, political position. First on post-conflict states. This looks like a nation that has been in a terrible state, normally after a large-scale conflicts like wars, violent riots, and many more. This way for a nation to be a post-conflict state is to amend, to be made, and for the previous regime to give into the voice of the people, or else the nation will be in conflicts. That's to say, the people and the governmental body has probably forgiven each other for their past, or the governmental body has already done the job in ensuring a harmonious nation and is trying to move forward. Secondly, on previous regime, people that were in governmental body prior or during a conflict before, for example, like the former prime minister or a retired politician, their family will look like anyone blood related to them, for example, like their children, niece, nephew, and many more. Important to note that they probably hold influential power in the society by virtue of the fact that they held from previous regimes also, meaning they have accumulate wealth, connection, and experience for the previous ruling. Thirdly, on the political positions, any source of power in democracy, for example, like politicians, members of parliament, members of the government. Everyone in the society have high regards towards this individual since their social status are high, and they have a say, especially in politics, where it involves making decisions that affect the people on a large scale, for example, like the economy, political scene, or the social development of the nation after the conflict. Moving on to the argument. A few points of signposting. We have three arguments in opposition side. First, have prior connection and experience due to the monarchy they hail from. Second, political polarization. And third off, natural incentive to not be a bad politician because their reputation in a post-conflict state is most important to stay relevant. I'll take the first and second argument while Basu will take the third one. Now, moving on to my first argument on how have prior connection and experience due to the family they hail from. This is the most important in post-conflict state because we need to get economic prosperity to handle everyone. Framing then, as we know, if the individual is a former person in power, it is quite obvious that they will be well known and they will already have several connections from lots of other nation leaders as well. I'm pretty sure this is the common ground where side of government will also agree on because it's very guaranteed that you're already well known if you're a member of previous regime and that you will come with a set up reputation and have already been familiar with the empire already. That's to say, these people have the connection, they have the money, for example, similar to old money being passed down from generation to generation, and they also have the prior experience. No, thank you. I have two layers of analysis on how this will bring benefit if the individual decided to hold a political position. First, on connection, they already make the base connection with other country leaders. The connection can actually help them since they already make allies with other countries. And second of all, about money, how they already hold influential status in the nation already because of the money they own, meaning that they can lobby for change faster and easier because of the political and financial capital they own individually. thorough on experience. They know the basic knowledge on how to run a country, even though the background of the nation itself and what is the most strategic for the ruling and for the nation that they are ruling. Government will have to defend a new leader who are not very familiar with the country and not very well known, not very known new leaders. Meaning the new leader will probably need to go loads of foundational works to be a people's leader and have their unify and follow their stance. We will say this will not help since it's already a post-conflict state already. So the problem at hand is really urgent. Moving on to the impact. On a macro scale, we can learn from past mistake and we will not repeat mistake that they have commit since it actually does cause to a post-conflict state in the first place, therefore leading it to be more developed and anti-war in the future. Second point then on political polarization. Framing, if opposition doesn't want to give members of previous regimes some power in ruling the nation, they will be left to be random influencer on the ground. This is because of their agreed or of their already garnered support and reputation. It is common sense that there will be some people still in support of them. Since some people have chosen to religiously follow the previous regime and decided to stay loyal towards that family because they're already in line with their political stance, it is very clear on how there will be a lot of people who will have a very different opinions fighting in the government side of the house. This is even more prominent because the influential people from the previous regime will likely garner a lot of support now that since they are very, very close by proximate to the people, meaning that it's easier to relate to this individual now than before. This means that the current ruling government body in proposition will have to deal with some opposition from by creating a bureaucracy within the nation itself, which will stagnate the development of the nation because issues are dispersed and incompetent government will have to deal with all of them individual without any prior background. Why is this true then? When this happens, there will be a segregation between the people, those who support the government of the past and think that the current government is incompetent, while those who are trying to support the new government will be against the other. Now, impact, this will be on a macro scale because that's the only impact that we can have. You will have a divided nation where everyone picks sides. This then will further worsen the state of the country since the people don't even cooperate with each other to make the country a better state, exclusive harm only on the government side only, and I'm so proud to oppose.
Thank you, the speaker, for that speech. Can we now have DPM? Here.
All right, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
All right, verbal POIs, please, and I'll preferably check one. Yeah, verbal POIs. Okay. All right. Speech starting in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to talk about 2 lines of substances in a speech. First, on the empowerment of accountability, and second, on how you represent minorities on a comparative of the proposition. But before that, just 2 lines of direct rebuttals to directly delete opposition out of the realm. The first thing they say is that these individuals from these past regimes are more likely not to be more experienced, and therefore they have the ability to constitute and to contribute a lot to the nation's economy and development. The first thing I'm going to point out is that on our side of the house, these individuals can still be consultants or literally political or still get involved in politics in some way or the other as well, that they do things, for example, to be whistleblowers or to give references and appoint opinions regarding the political arena, or to give suggestions publicly in terms of how they think the government can operate and in terms of how the state can improve policies upon. Why is this likely? Literally, it is all the reasons that LO gives upon how benevolent these individuals are. The fact is that they are benevolent. On the other side of the house, the state have extra incentives to want to get them involved in politics. The only delineation in this debate is that you don't get things, for example, they don't get involved in things that, for example, except for the fact that they don't get involved in politics and they cannot hold positions of power like ministers who are perfectly fine of that. This also defeats their argument on connections, because it is unclear to me that insofar as they say that they have connections and pre-established connections with leaders from other nations, therefore they're also likely to be benevolent. The response magically applies because those connections can also be utilized in our health as well. You can participate in politics, then what to do with that whatsoever. But even if then, I just want to contest, right? They don't explain exactly what we kind of get with people on our side of the house. I would argue, in fact, it is likely, right? Because a lot of times you have charismatic individuals or charismatic leaders on the ground who generally want to improve the quality of life of people, whether they possess this particular line of incentive. Because a lot lot of times in post-conflict states, individuals are more unionized. They've witnessed the sufferings that the individuals have gone through on the ground. That they've particularly been through one that is atrocity, as what opposition also characterizes. Therefore, you have a sense of like unification that literally tells you that we need to improve the quality of our life. That is why charismatic leaders still exist in our city of house. That is why we're still able to get some form of benevolent actors to do so. The second is say that, oh, there's like some backlash from the people because somehow like individuals affiliate themselves with these leaders a lot, and if you disable from the participating in politics whatsoever, like the people get mad as a result of. I just want to make fun of this, right? Because LO even concedes to the fact that this is immensely marginal. But second of all, I just want to flag that individuals can still vote for similar people that represent themselves best in our city of house. The fact is, if individuals get capacity to vote, it is unclear to me whether they're likely to make such a great noise. Even if there is like some noise made on our city of house, we believe that exists on either side, and that is the nature of politics itself, where you have, if you want to, whatever you do, there will be some level of opposition that disagrees with you. We think that is good in itself because it allows for more capacity to self-reflection. The entire opposition is gone. First issue on accountability and why we get them more on our side. There's two main reasons, right? The first I would argue is that there is more checks and balances in our city of house. This looks like the people that come from different political groups, a more diverse group that people come from different social academic backgrounds. So this looks like, for example, what this means is they have different intentions and they have different demographics to cater to, right? Things, for example, they come from different races, they come from racial backgrounds, and therefore they're more likely not to have an incentive to want to particularly cater towards their own race. What this means is that a participation in corruption in itself is a disincentive that they don't want to associate themselves with, because this increases their ability and the capacity to contribute or to cater towards their own people. The reason for it is simple. If you get called out or you risk yourself in participating in corruptions, for example, that affects your reputation, you're more likely to get voted out, you're more likely to get called out. That is why you lose trust in the people. That increases your capacity to be able to contribute to your own people. That is why there's a massive disincentive if you have a group of individuals in our city that comes from different diverse backgrounds to literally commit corruption. The response in LO was, oh, but you have called from people on the ground. The first thing I'm going to point out is just that the first thing I'm going to point out is that this is just vehemently untrue, right? Because people on the ground don't have access to information in terms of how the politics actually function. People don't have access to, and literally all these corruptions are done under the table, right? So the corruption leaders can still paint themselves as benevolent in front of a public. Literally, the classic example here is just like Najib Razak. We literally, after the 1MDB scandal, which literally like $2.6 billion, and he's still receiving so much support in the status quo. But even then, if people still can call out people in their state of house, we still think it is still detrimental, because understand that elections only occur and happen 4 years once. So the factor is that even if people don't feel comfortable with those forms of leaders, they need to wait literally 4 years after you finish a particular electoral period in order for them to literally vote these individuals out. And 4 years is enough for a lot of corruption to continue to occur, to screw up your entire economy as a whole. The analysis on L talks about how development is incremental towards these developing nations, applies towards them as well. So the fact is you screw up economy even worse on their side, it has to get worse development on their side. So the fact is that they're bad and not progressive. Look at how Britain's economy is corrupt during like Boris Johnson's period. That is how severe corruption and how severe like a non-progressive politician can affect your capacity, your country's economy, your capacity for the country's economy to exist. But second, I just want to point out there's more incentive call out in our city of house, right? Because understand that if you see people committing corruption and they don't come from your own family, they don't come from your own regime whatsoever, you don't have those pre-established emotional baggers or those pre-established emotional connections with them. So that is why. But secondly, I just want to point out that calling them out actually gives you more merit. So your actions are seen as preventing corruption from occurring to begin with. That is why you're more likely to perceive it as a hero. That is why comparative in our city house, we have a more diverse group of politicians in the political parliament. You have extra incentives for people to call each other out, to make sure that each other are literally is actually hold into account, right? So the conclusion to all of this is that corruption is more prevalent on their side of the house. But even if corruption does not occur in the short run, we can see that they're likely to be good as for what LO claims. We'll argue that corruption in longevity is still one that's prevalent and is still one that's meant to be harmful on their side of the house. Things, for example, after their fathers and their grandpas have already established their power in all of their important positions for them to do so, the younger generations can just come back, and the fact is that there is little to no incentive to want to better themselves because of the entirety of what their ancestors have already done towards themselves. So the fact is that you still continue to vote these individuals on their side of house in, corruption is much worse. In terms of accountability, we clearly took this. On a second argument, in terms of the representation for minorities, if you allowed for them to position of power, we'd argue they're more likely not to want to establish more power, and they're really more likely not to want to pass these positions down through their descendants, right? So the factor is, why is this likely? First of all, your kids gets literally the best opportunities, the best quality of education, the best opportunities whatsoever. On the parent side of the house, we would argue, first of all, they have an incentive to want to hope for their child to continue this, because first of all, if your child continues to be in politics, that is viewed as a continuation of the family's name and a prosperity. The aim is literally someone to continue all of the things they've been doing, right? They also have the capacity to do so, right? You have like pre-established connections that give them easier paths to enter politics. The evidence in the status quo, you have like literally Najib Razak being like Tun Abdul Razak, which is like the second PM in Malaysia's son, and now he's like, and what, he's like the 6th PM whatsoever. But also the Philippines example, right? The fact that you have the Marcos regime, and right now they're getting into power again. This is what happens on your side of the house. Where are people more likely to view both these individuals on your opposition? Because they have preconceived notions that if the father is good, the son is likely to be good. But a lot of times we've told you why that is not the case, because you have no incentive whatsoever to better yourself at the very end of the day. So the point here is that minorities don't get represented whatsoever on their side of the house because of the preconceived notions that these individuals are benevolent, because these individuals, how good they're likely to act. But a lot of times you screw up the economy on the opposition, but you also screw up the representation for minorities to even achieve any of those things on our side. For these reasons, proposition proceed.
I would like to thank the DPM for the speech. Can we now have the LO? Here.
So I'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you.
Yes, you are audible.
All right. For POIs, verbally please. I'll just set up my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We're not saying that with us standing with like the people and the regimes, like having generational stance in politics, right? We're not saying that the others or other people or other politicians are not going to have exact like representation in like the politics in of it as itself, because there will still be other politicians like alongside with them and that will like play a part in the country itself. So my speech will include few pieces of rebuttals and an argument. Few pieces of rebuttals and an argument on natural incentive to not be a bad politician. The rebuttals then. Firstly, they say that these politicians will maximize the use of power. We agree that politicians may have this incentive to do so, but do note how this is extremely dangerous and will put the family on a stance where people will start to doubt them. This results in them losing power, right? Therefore, we don't see how these politicians are going to put this at stake when you really have already said that they want power in the first place. On them covering up the corruption then, it is also possible, but we say that it is on scale because what guarantee is there that the other politicians aren't under the generational politics families are going to hinder from corruption, from corruption as of itself and not cover their corruption as well. Because just as so, they could easily want to maximize the power that they gain and to use it for themselves as well. So we don't see how this is this is only possible in our side of the house. And to an accountability, politics will be more diverse on their side of the house. We say that we also get this because just on how they say these politicians will stay in the politics, right? Like we say the other charismatic politicians that they claim they have are also still in politics. Therefore, the diversity still exists on our side of the house because they're still able to give out their views alongside other politicians as well. Therefore, if the minister is going to result to an action that is simply unjust towards few minority groups, the group of politicians are just able to point out their views and make statements to make sure the minister does not harm any sort of group of people, right? And when they say that other minorities aren't going to get representatives, but we have never said that we aren't going to take the people from certain groups. Yes, we say it is more like it's likely that on our side of the house, these people or these politicians are going to pick and are going to cherry pick. But like I've already also said, they probably would want to keep their reputations up and then to make sure they still have they're in favor of the people. Therefore, if they want the favored people like on their side, they will actually have the incentive and effort to actually find people from different group of minorities to actually be in like the politics like alongside with them as well. Now on my argument then on natural incentive to not be a bad politician, because their reputation in a post-conflict state is most important to stay relevant and it deters them from being corruptive and it also basically just learns from mistake as well. So the premise of this is that these politicians being in politics from generation to generation, having an important reputation to preserve, and it also looks like an influential power in half the people's favor. They have natural incentives to not do something that will further harm their reputation and relevance. Now, how likely are these politicians are going to have the natural incentive to be good. Now, considering they have been in politics generations after the
information.
other, no, thank you. It is obvious for them to play a big part in politics and have powerful reputation amongst people on the ground or other politicians. Now, politicians would want to stay relevant and actually be able to keep the people's favor on their side, right? Therefore, they would less likely do something that is even worse in a post-conflict state, considering it is fragile and the people are in need of help overall. Let's say if they don't engage with the people or continue to do corruptive actions, it is very likely that people are going to go against them for the reason that they are making the situation worse. This will lead them to losing power and relevance in politics because the people aren't in their favor anymore. And then since they're in like a post-conflict state, they would think if the people are not united or segregated, right? Due to this, the whole country as of itself under like their ruling, the politicians' ruling will actually fall, which will harm themselves and their family. Yeah, sure thing.
On your side of the house, it is literally your family members who are corrupting. Why are you likely to call them out given all the emotional connections you have? Versus on our side, literally it's a nobody.
Oh, all right. I will actually further on explain this into my argument like further on. But why we say that this is less likely because of the actual influential power or like the people's favor as of itself, right? When they actually cover up or like they cover up for their families due to emotional ties and everything like that, people will actually start to doubt because of these things. And when they doubt and when they like start to think twice about this politician family or politics or like in the politics system as of itself, right? They would like start to slowly lose power, and then rumors are like stories would go around. Therefore, they would just not gain any much power anymore. And I don't think they would want that to happen, considering that their generation or their families have been in the line of politics from like generations to generations. So we say that this is less likely to happen. And even if it does, I will talk about it further on in my speech. And also, secondly, they are the ones holding power and cleaning up the mess that has been made in the country, right? If they continue to result in something that is unjust or something that can have like a possibility of harming the state even more, it is their responsibility to actually fix it right after anyway. Therefore, we don't see how in a post-conflict state, they will go through the trouble to do things that will further harm the country. And then even if they say politicians don't exactly have to clean all this up themselves still, right? But it doesn't outweigh for the very fact that their reputation will not be preserved and will make the people on the ground doubt them or go against them even more if they do actually like the conflict happened after in the first place was the cause by these politicians. So it will like lose even more power than they already have, considering of the conflict before. And then why and how these politicians are going to do better, we say that it is important that they put in efforts to actually help the country in order to keep their relevance upright and keep their power. How they do this is done by deterring away from corruption. They deter away from the corruption due to the fact that they will probably have their time fixated on the betterment of the said country, mostly in the post-conflict time, because they want to stay relevant to the people on the ground in order to continue having power over the people and country to continue what has been a generational success to them. And even if they actually do harmful things despite their reputation at stake, right? We don't see how it actually looks like on the other politicians from the family are going to do the same thing. Yes, we agree that the family cover up for people, but they also not actually given us an analysis as to why they actually think so. It is like saying all family members on a certain on certain family are going to stay in one type of career throughout their whole life only. And also, even if they say that the likelihood of them actually able to restore the country is low with the next generations to come, etc., do you know how these kids, future politicians in the family, would most likely be groomed, most likely have been groomed for the role since they were young anyway to take over like after the elders, right? Therefore, we say that they are likely to know the premise of it and how they're going to restore the country post-conflict. Now, impacts. How does this link back to the case study? The impacts that we're able to see here is that these politicians would be extra careful to not further harm their reputation and political stance in order to stay relevant for the people on the ground. And what this brings is it brings improvement in the life of the people because these politicians are not going to result in corruptive actions. How does this look like is when it looks like politicians making effort for the favor of the people and them investing or putting money into the betterment of the country's infrastructure, etc. And with all that, I'm proud to oppose. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speaker for the speech. My apologies for the absence of the 6-minute timestamp. Hirshik will be keeping time from now on. Now to continue debate, let's hear it from the government with here.
Sorry, can, can you give me a minute to plug in my laptop? I'm sorry.
All right, sure. No worries.
Okay, sorry. I'll take POIs verbally after the 5th minute. Yeah. Yeah. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. When nepotism exists, corruption and the sufferings of minorities on the ground are more likely to be hidden under years of legacies and the inherent anchoring biases and inherent anchoring biases towards these political parties, pushing post-conflict states further into the ground, preventing them from having any form of development because of the incapable government built from blood instead of capabilities. Very proud to propose. I'll prove 2 things in my speech. Number 1, that we get more accountability and ability to call out forms of corruption. And number 2, that developing nations are more likely to move forward. Vulnerable individuals are more likely to get help because the government has more incentives to do so. So I'll be moving on to the main clash in today's debate, which is where are post-conflicts better off? First layer to this, which is the premise of opposition's entire case. First layer, they basically tell us how people will vote them out and leaders will have the incentive to not be corrupted because they want the country to be good, right? So a few layers to this. First, meta debating. They don't engage with our layered argument about how it's very likely for their families to very unlikely for their families to call each other out, right? They give us no response as to why accountability exists on your side of the house. We already explained multiple times why these families members have the incentive and capacity to cover scandals up because they have the power, money, and connections to do so, right? And then when the leader now, but on our side of the house, we already told you that when the leader is now not related or part of a previous regime, they have no incentive to cover up the shady stuff that the government does now because they solely want the country to improve right now, right? Because the person in power isn't your son, isn't your daughter, isn't anyone, it's a stranger who you have little no emotional ties to, which we believe we have more accountability on our house because like they don't have the incentive to actually hide the shady stuff that they do, right? But the next layer to this is I'll explain why basically there won't be any call outs on the opposition. First, voters are inherently just stupid, right? Because of a few reasons. A, because of the anchoring bias and tendency of judging stuff based on pre-existing information, right? Because voters are likely to base their votes off historical events and past or dead leaders like Nelson Mandela and Lee Kuan Yew, right? Which is the easiest route because voters would think are very unlikely to vote for a new leader that they know nothing about, right? Because so you are likely to just hinder onto the past and hinder of the past information that you already know, which is bad, right? Because obviously, if the past leader is good doesn't mean their son will be good, and this just continues the cycle of corruption, right? But the second reason is because of bandwagoning, where voters just follow what their friends and families vote for, right? Because usually vote for the dominant political party because then if you vote for the smaller political party, other people will call you stupid, and you obviously want. And you see that dominant parties can secure a lot of votes, so you just automatically think that's the best option, and you just bandwagon of your friends, and you see, oh, my friends are just voting for Najib, right? So I'll just vote for Najib because that's the dominant political party, right? But the third reason is because of the social, in the status quo, there's inherent bias, and people are just reluctant to change and explore their options, right? So they're likely to go for the safer option because they're too lazy to invest their time and effort into actually understanding other parties and leaders that are new to them, and they are just likely to vote for the most proximal option and the most popular option, right? But so that's just the layer on how voters are inherently just they just don't with these families in powers and like nepotism, they are not unlikely to go branch out and actually learn more about like better politicians, right? Because they're hindering to the past. But the second reason is because of just like national identity, because a lot of countries start off as a pro-democratic movement and they develop a national identity that pushes people to work together, right? So over time, people conflict like political identities with the state itself, i.e. people see BN as Malaysia and ANC as South Africa, right? And because of their national identity and the past, they just don't want to go against their own country and their own past, right? So overall, in this layer, I really proved to you why there are less call outs and voters are just unlikely to call out the corrupted stuff that like the government does and are just likely to go with the flow, right? So the conclusion is once you allow the past regimes to take over the country, it's extremely hard for you to hold them accountable and stop the cycle of corruption, because without these existing regimes and family members, voters are more likely to be able to invest and have incentives to learn more about other leaders, and they're not going to hinge on the past and connections and like assume if the past leader is good, their descendants are gonna be like good as well, right? But the second, okay, after this layer, I'll be moving on to the second thing they tell us, which is you won't lose power under their side. But they didn't respond to how you can cover up these like scandals more easily. When the entire parliament comes from your family, people can visualize corruption if no one calls them out, and they haven't proven to us why there are people who are willing to call them out. So corruption that happens under tables just won't be discovered on your side house. So opposition literally agreed that they have incentives to continue their family's legacies. So it's more likely for you to cover up all the bad deeds and that go undiscovered in the first place, right? So you contended to it. So like on your side house, you do lose power, and basically you do lose power, and corruption is just likely to exist more. But the last thing that tells us is basically on their side house, oh, they have more experience, and that's the only benefit they give us, right? So meta debating, they didn't explain to us why it's unlikely for us to get good leaders, and I don't see the significance of this experience, because you can just vote for charismatic people and capable and experienced leaders as well. I also think even if the first generation regime is good and they can you won't have any guarantee that like the next generation is going to be good as well. So lastly, the last layer of my speech is some weighing. So ops mechanism is basically the whole case, and the whole benefits is only like contingent on their only call out method, which is reliant on their family members calling out their relatives or someone close to them. But I don't see how, like for example, your dad is gonna expose their own son for lobbying. I don't see why, with all the emotional connections, and you see your son grow up, you're willing to have that incentive to see your son get thrown in jail and getting framed as a criminal, right? I don't see why this call-out method is even effective. But we believe that corruption is more important and we should focus on that. And we believe that corruption decreases the country's ability to have funds for important infrastructures. It just brings bad reputation for your nation and decreases the attraction for investors to come into your country. And lastly, it hinders the ability for nations to actually develop, right? So I believe that to prevent corruption and all these harms from further developing, we should support today's motion. Very proud to propose. Thank you.
All right, to thank the speaker for his speech, can we now have the opposition whip? Here.
Okay, give me a sec to set up my timer. Thanks. Okay. I take POIs verbally. I'll start And hold on, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Reading for the fact that thus far they just hinged on the fact of corruption despite the structural reasons that we've given to you why corruption would never happen in the first place. I'll go through this more in my wing and I'll flag you when I get there, but because of the fact they basically ignored all of our likelihood analysis as to why corruption will be less likely to happen, and even if it happens, it'll probably happen symmetrically. Therefore, they already lost today's debate. I'll do 2 days in my speech. First of all, I have one extraneous rebuttal on their points, and second of all, I'll clash on the long-term development of a nation. And this is where I'll flag out why is it on our side. We ensure that we cater to the post-conflict state in and of itself because of the very reason that the situation in itself is pretty urgent, and henceforth, by virtue of a policy, we get to fulfill that weighing of urgency in the first place. Henceforth, we take today's debate. Firstly, on the rebuttal of like the representation for minorities, right? This is a pretty small impact that they pushed in their speeches, but we see that first of all, this argument is value neutral since they never proved the likelihood of this. But second of all, this in itself is unlikely because minorities probably don't have the political and financial capital to reach high positions of power by virtue of their arbitrary social status in and of itself, which means they probably don't have the financial capital to have political campaigns, for example. And even if politicians is like, I don't know, rooting for minorities, that's also probably going to be something that's going to happen on our side of the house, since these very people that rise up to power have the incentive to cater to the people in order to secure their reputation and influence for all those reasons, right? All this like exclusive impact has already been like made exclusive and also like made untrue on their side of the house. But on the clash then, the main clash of focus today is on the clash of the long-term development of the nation. On proposition, they posited you 2 things. First of all, their positive case of they told us that we're going to have technocrats or like representative of the people to be elected for the new government, and henceforth this is better in a post-conflict state in order to ensure the development. And they also gave you an accountability measures of having a third party to oversee the process. But then their negative case towards us was that there's going to be corruption outside of the house because first of all, families have the incentive to cover up through emotional proximity, and also there's like little accountability. But I believe that both my substantive speakers thus far has already refuted this, but I'll refute this even more in my weighing. I think on the point of weighing then, I feel like the most important thing that all the panel needs to understand is that in the post-conflict state, the problem that's in the nation, like being the people being impoverished or just having the economy being fragile is very urgent, right? Because these post-conflict states need urgent help to be uplifted. This is like the economy like being like unstable or the political scene in itself to be non-existent after the large-scale conflict. And in this moment, right, we believe there's no one from the civilians that's competent enough to take up this high burden of power because they were too affected in the conflict prior to this. I'll like refute what they said later on, right? But what was our solution to this? This is our positive case. We've told you that we allow members of the previous regime to hold political positions for 3 structural reasons. First of all, they have connections. Second of all, they have wealth. And third of all, they have the experience. That's to say they have the influence and the intellectual capability to rule a nation out of the stagnated state of like being regressive for the fact that they're post-conflict and hence were able to develop them. What was the response then? The main push from all of their speakers thus far was that the members of the past regime will be corrupted and there's no accountability measure towards this, and because families will cover up. Reading on the thesis alone, they told you the impacts of corruption and why it's so bad, but they never pushed the likelihood of corruption happening in the first place. Why then would they not want to be corrupt? This is Bazin's whole substantive speech, by the way. We told you that because their influence is contingent on their competency, families would not want to let their child continue to be corrupted because they will harm themselves in the process because they'll be painted as corrupt politicians and untransparent once the truth comes out, meaning that they will have to bring economic and political prosperity to the nation in order to show their competency as a ruling government. And because of the fact that the nation is post-conflict, the people underground would know to look out for themselves and to like call out a wrong government that will lead them to damnation, right? What this means is that the people underground will be the check and balance towards the ruling government to ensure economic prosperity, or else the leader will probably be boycotted and impeached afterwards. This is then parallel to everything you see in status quo. For example, in democracies, leaders try their best to be competent, or else they will not be voted after their presidential period ends, or the judiciary, for example, the Supreme Court, acts as a third party regardless. But also in authoritarian states, let's take them at their best, it's like they try to ensure economic prosperity regardless to be on the good side of their oligarchies, or else their businesses fail and therefore the economy fail and therefore like they don't have like the funding and like lobbying power that they need. And but then they responded by saying that the people on the ground probably don't know politics, hence they're unlikely to be able to call them out. And they gave examples like 1MDB, for example, right? We think this comment is then non-exclusive because these people who don't know politics, for example, exist the same in your civilian like demographic. Therefore, there's little to no accountability in your side of the house if this was true. Hence, if corruption then happened on your side of the house, there's also little accountability measures. But okay, even if the people on the ground isn't the check and balance towards this, right? We will also posit to you that the international community can also act as a third party to ensure accountability towards the current ruling government. For example, the UN in itself and the standards they set, or just other global superpowers like the West that has the incentive to ensure democracy in nations, to ensure a stable economy in other places. But okay, then afterwards they told us that the family would not not want to call out their family members by virtue of their emotional proximity. Henceforth, these type of like corruptive acts would not be exposed to the public. On a clarification, right, we like to clarify that the entire parliament probably won't be your family in the first place, because the motion states that we propose that these people will be eligible for positions in power, but not all of them. Plus, I don't think a family can fill up an entire parliament hall anyways, because that's like a ton of children. But that was something that also my deputy called out, this is unfair for the government whip, so ignored it. But let's just respond on like emotional proximity in itself. We understand that they have to understand you don't necessarily need families calling you out to get the truth exposed anyways, because assuming that the leader was really, really bad and was really, really corrupted, that would be reflected in their way of ruling, like outright electoral fraud and covering up with bad lies like how Trump did. This then proves the check and balances from the people which then exist in the status quo, and there are tons of parallels in the like society in and of itself to prove this. But okay, assuming their best case and that the politicians was really good, like really good and manipulated, and therefore they have gaslighted everyone into believing that they're good. This probably runs on a very small number of cases. Hence, we do not have the burden to defend the extreme, but that also means it probably exists on both sides anyways, because corrupted individuals can happen on either side due to the arbitrary external forces that might exist in their side as well. Therefore, this proves to you that there are check and balances either way. Hence, corruption cannot be their main push because there are measures against them on both sides of the house. That's to say, if corruption can be mitigated, this debate has to then come down to which side has the largest capability to ensure the development of the nation. For the reason that we've given you structural reasons as to why the ruling government on our side will be able to be more competent than proposition's proposal, we've taken the debate. But why is this true, right? Let's take you through the comparative. Their counter proposal was to have people in power to be like voted in. Sure, you might have charismatic people that the civilians will vote for, but the question that we've been positing is whether or not they can become competent. Sure, let's assume that an individual really was charismatic. For example, like me, right? I really love my nation and I don't want militant politicians to stay in parliament. But if you put me in the governing body, the nation would probably crumble because I have no experience in politics. For the reason that people on your side and the rulers in your side will have people like me, these kind of post-conflict states would probably crumble at their worst case. But let's assume their best that you do have good people. These people are probably privileged in and of itself, and hence why we don't have like representative for like the representation for minorities. Hence why for all those reasons we fulfill the obligation of the government. We take the debate. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speaker for the speech. Can we have the opposition reply? Here. Opposition reply whenever you're ready.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let me bulldoze through this mass of destruction, and I'm going to say what we have said and what they have said and how we have responded. Now, what we have said, we have given you 3 arguments and we are giving you a very structured analysis to all of our arguments. First, on how we have prior connection and experience to the monarchy they hail from, where I've given structured analysis on how this can contribute in development, which government have been pushing us to not have one, therefore leading it to more development and anti-war in the future, which I already stated in my speech earlier. They then decide to make claims that we don't actually give them structured analysis, and how they completely ignore my very structured analysis. Second, then, on our argument on political polarization. The family has been in politics for a very long time, therefore a lot of people are probably in their favor and support them when they are a very new minister, and there will be mixed feeling and opinion resulting to a segregated society, and considering the country is in a post-conflict state, this is simply harmful to the country and minister due to the very fact that more problems are going to occur and bring the relevance down as well. The people would then doubt that and not continue supporting because the harms that they have contributed to the problem, this basically harms the politician. Therefore, they would less likely actually result to corruption and more, putting them at stake to losing even more power as a whole. Thirdly, on how it is a natural incentive to not be a bad politician because their reputation is in a post-conflict state. It's most important to stay relevant, and that has already been in my second speaker's speech earlier. Already have been emphasized on how they are less likely to tarnish their generation's success in politics due to the corruption. Thus, it is to say what corruption can they exactly result to in a country are going to a post-conflict state in which everything is just fragile and will put everything at stake, including their own ruling. Now, this is what they have said and how we have responded. Okay, firstly, they are keep on harping on corruption, how corruption will happen, and which we already have been tackled this point because my third speaker just gave us a very structured clashes on how corruption is not really likely to happen. We've given you a reason as it is very less likely to happen. They ignore this, then we assume their best that the corruption does happen. We have proven this to be symmetrical. Secondly, they have said about the family the family will also be corrupted. Now, the response to this is that my third speaker have already told you that they have no incentive to do so, since their reputation is already important in this state of the world, since it's already a post-conflict state. Therefore, we already taken down that point. Thirdly, they have already they said that we are not holding this individual accountable. This has already been rebutted and tackled down by both of my second speaker and my third speaker in their speech. And fourthly, on their counter proposal, we have given you reason as to why their counter proposal probably will have incompetent people because this individual do not have enough experience. We give you an example of if a person right now love the nation and rise up to power with interest of the nation in mind, they wouldn't necessarily be a good politician or leader since they don't know the background. And even if they have competent people, it be the people who have been privileged from the start, meaning you cannot get reputation for minorities since they don't have the same life experience and as the vulnerable, so their only standing impact cannot stand. We have made conclusion on how we have now let's make a conclusion. We have tackled down all of their point and argument, and we even give you structured analysis on the benefit and how our benefit can actually outweigh the harms the government trying to push us on, and I'm so proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for the speech. Now, to end the debate, can we now have the government reply? Here.
All right, I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
All right, speech starting in 3, 2, 1. The first thing to address in this reply is accountability and the prevention of corruption. A couple of reasons why that's the most important clash. First of all, both sides agree that a progression in development is the most important thing in this debate. We say when we have corruption, we wash away those funds, therefore you hinder the funds to build things and infrastructure that achieves development that they want to have. We explained in second of all, we explained in third that a corrupted country decreases the incentive of investors to come in as a whole. So we prove that we decrease corruption in our state of house, presumably development also flourishes better on our side. The claim of the opposition in the immensely late third opposition speech was to contest that, oh, corruption is unlikely to exist. That is untrue because we told you how individuals have an incentive to want to consolidate their power. But number two, weighing on incentives, the harm you expose yourself to under the context which can potentially conceal yourself easily versus the amount of benefits you can get from that particular corruption that extends to economic prosperity as a collective means you're more likely not to want to do these forms of corruptions on either side of house. It's a matter of extent that exists better worse on their side. Why do you then literally decrease corruption in our side of house? We told you number one on how it's easier to call these individuals out. We explained in second that these individuals are not your family members, so you have less of an incentive to want to consume them. We asked them their second speaker POI regarding this. They said we'll address this later, but all they say down the bench was people can call them up, right? We explained in second also, by the way, that corruption happens under a table. Ostensibly, if they're doing corruption, they aren't going to make announcements and tell everyone that, hey, we're doing corruption. So the so-called likelihood analysis that Prop misses in his debate, where third opposition accuses us, is just immensely ridiculous because it's literally the same thing the public can oppose or call these individuals out. We told you number one how the public has no information towards whatsoever that these corruption that are really happening. We also explain in third as to why there's not only have an incentive to not only choose not to call their own family members, but want to cover those things up as much as possible because of how it affects the reputation of their family. No one knows corruption is happening, right? So the bottom line is that even if public have an incentive to really call these individuals out, the lack of access towards information disables them to do all these things. The final response and final strike they have literally before they die in third opposition was, oh, first of all, you can vote these individuals out. Number one, that is not response to the nuance we gave you in our second speech. We told you even that is the case, it is a reactionary mechanism at worst, at best, right? The fact that you need corruption to happen and therefore literally only call these individuals out. Compared to the proactiveness on our side of the house, we prevent the root causes or literally foundational incentives for these things to happen to begin with. Number one, that is already comparatively better. But second, even then we told you that is a bad mechanism, right? Because the fact that we still need to wait 4 years or 5 years before the very next election happens, they were able to vote these individuals out. That is bad because within 4 years and 5 years, your economy can literally get screwed up so badly, right? So the second response they had immensely ridiculous and third opposition as well was that, oh, you can get third parties to intervene, right? The United Nations can come in and check and balance. First of all, this is immensely late. Presumably, it should not be credited because government cannot respond to this. But second of all, even then, there's no mechanism to this, right? Why would the UN have an incentive to intervene? No one else is. But second, I would argue they cannot because we told you in how that is not response to the nuance. We told you in terms of how these political parties have an extravagant incentive to want to consume these information as much as possible, right? Why is therefore a corruption decrease on our side of the house? We told you in second and third that you have an incentive to call people out exclusively in our side of the house because you're seen and perceived as a hero that fights corruption. They're more likely to not get merits and support. So conclusively, you have decreased corruption in our side of the house. And like development is also better and development flies better on our side. Second thing I want to talk about in this speech that in terms of like the better and more experienced leaders they can have on their side. The observation here is that the first speaker's speech primarily focuses on this, but the second speech completely dropped it and literally the third tried to save this drowning boat, right? But the factor is that where we told you, but also after the response we told you in second, where these individuals, even if they're experienced and can get themselves involved in politics in some way or the other, right? They can be whistleblowers, can be consultants, they can be critics whatsoever, and to help and to suggest the state to improve their policies whatsoever. Why that's likely? Of all the analysis that first opposition chooses to talk about how they're benevolent, means there's an incentive for them to want to hire them on our side. But also we contested in second that in fact you have charismatic individuals who generally want to build these forms of structures to literally contribute towards the development of the country as a whole. So entirely on terms of like better and more experienced leaders, it is entirely symmetric, except for the fact that on your side you have more corruption, which decreases the capacity for the progression of development to occur on these grounds clearly with one.